Hi everyone, today I will show you how I exploited Samsung Secure Boot to retrieve sensitive data in the Galaxy S10. My name is Chao. I have been playing CTF in Hikang CTF team for 10 years. I am also a member of Cheng-Yu, Taiwan's private security studying group. I now focus on mobile and IoT security. This is my agenda. In the beginning, I will play a demo video to show a scenario where the vulnerabilities could be exploited. Then, I will introduce how Samsung enhanced the security in Android with their own framework, Knox, and a quick glance to see previous research on Knox framework. With the background knowledge, I will explain the vulnerabilities I found and how to exploit Secure Boot by these vulnerabilities. And finally, I will discuss how further damage can be caused after exploiting Secure Boot, even without the passcode. Before we start, let's watch a demo video. Let me start by giving you a brief introduction of the Samsung security framework, Knox. Knox is a huge, complicated whole system security enhancement based on trustzone. It contains TMA trustzone-based integrity measurement architecture, real-time kernel protection, TMA periodic kernel measurement, SE Linux enhancement, and many other things to prevent privilege escalation and unauthorized access to the phone's data. Since we are attacking the bootloader, we will only discuss the most relevant part, Secure Boot. The Android boot procedure starts from the primary bootloader, also called PVL. It will load the second stage bootloader. In Samsung devices, it is called Secure Boot, also known as S-Boot. Secure Boot will bring up the operating system from the boot image. Each boot stage will verify the signature before proceeding to the next stage. The verified key is stored in hardware during manufacturing. Primary bootloader only runs Secure Boot if the signature is valid. We cannot change the primary bootloader. Thus, the phone can only boot the official Secure Boot image. Next, Secure boot will launch the boot image or the required image if its signature is valid. If the signature is not valid, secure boot will boot the image with an additional action, which is blowing the Knox bit. What will happen if the Knox bit is set? The provision of Samsung's warranty depends on the Knox bit, also called the warranty bit. Trying to boot an unofficial boot image will tamper with the Knox bit. It is a one-time writable memory. There is no way to recover it. Some services in trustzone cannot be launched if the bit is set, such as Knox Container, Samsung Pay, and Trusted Key Store. After the Galaxy S9, Samsung equipped the storage with default settings. Only after the first time unlocking the screen, the storage gets decrypted. The encryption key is stored in the trustzone application. We cannot decrypt the storage without unlocking the phone, even if we have root privilege. Other than the storage encryption key, there is lots of critical information that can only be decrypted by trustlet. Once the Knox bit is set, most of them will no longer work. This is a diagram of untrustzone exception level. Traditional root method only get exception level 1 in non-secure world. The data encrypted by trustzone cannot be decrypted if Knox bit is set. The way to get sensitive data is privilege escalation to exception level 1 in secure world, or trick the device into thinking that the Knox bit is still safe. There has been a lot of research into breaking Knox protection. I will show you some previous work. First, at Black Hat USA 2017, Returns Me defeated Knox real-time kernel protection, which is designed to prevent privilege escalation from non-secure world exception level 0 to non-secure world exception level 1. And second, at Black Hat Europe 2017, Cheng-Yu Lab demoed a vulnerability to exploit a Samsung Pay trustlet in trustzone, resulting in an escalated privilege level from non-secure world exception level 0 to secure world exception level 1. Last year, Knox Lab demoed some amazing work that shattered the trustzone protection, resulting in privilege escalation all the way from non-secure world exception level 0 to secure world exception level 3. But all of this work needs at least non-secure world exception level 0 privilege. So what if the device is turned off and we don't know the passcode? In this talk, we are discussing the scenario in which we can exploit the locked phone and keep sensitive data reachable. In general, Samsung Secure Boot will verify the boot image and boot into kernel after setting up secure monitor and initializing hardware. But Secure Boot will enter OD mode if we press the button down and power buttons during the booting process. The OD mode allows user to flush stock firmware to manually update the phone. It not only verifies the signature, but also checks the version number. OD mode does not allow the user to flush previous versions or unofficial firmware. This exposes a channel for interacting with Secure Boot. In Odin mode, we found several vulnerabilities which can achieve arbitrary code execution. The first one can only get code execution on older models, like the Galaxy S8. Odin request is very simple. We send an integer as operation code. The operation code specifies the function we want to use in Odin. And then we follow that with another integer sub-operation to tell Odin whether we are going to set, get, or initialize something. And finally, we can have some argument. In Odin flash image command, the image size is provided by the user, and there is no check for it. Even if Odin decides the buffer location by the size, it has an integer overflow bug, so we can choose which buffer location we want. What data is stored behind the buffer? They are the secure boot code segment, VSS, stack, and heap. Due to the lack of size check, we can override everything and control the code segment, stack, and heap. Since the Galaxy S8, Samsung has tightened the NU table and set the code segment to read-only. Fortunately, USB devices have directory memory access. We are not restricted by MNU control. And next, we must deal with the cache incoherence problem. Since USB manipulates memory directly, we cannot affect the cache data. Unfortunately, while receiving data, the CPU keeps tracking the USB event, which is in a while loop. Obviously, this code is cached by the CPU. Therefore, we cannot affect the code data. But there are some memory segments which are not set to be cached, and those segments are the heap. In the while loop, it will access a heap pointer. Since the heap is not cached, once we overwrite heap data with all null bytes, it will access address 0 and trigger data abort. Once data abort is triggered, it will jump to the arrow handler immediately. The arrow handler function has never been executed, thus, it is not cached. We can just put jump slid on the arrow handler, and we put the shellcode in front of the code segment to ensure it will not be affected by the CPU cache. In conclusion, we overflow the memory according to the layout. Then, we can achieve arbitrary code execution in secure boot. But we are not able to exploit S9 and later, because the buffer location is changed to another address, which is far from the secure boot code segment. We had figured out a potential exploit path to exploit the newer model. In S9 and later, Odin changed the buffer location to a big address, which is behind the code segment. That is because Odin added a parallel download feature to make the transfer speed faster. To use this feature, secure boot needs to boot up another 2 CPU cores. If the core's boot fails, secure boot will fall back to normal download mode, which changes the buffer to the original location. So, we try to find a way to make the CPU boot fails. In secure boot, the CPU boot function will not boot the core if there are more than 3 cores activated. Thus, if we can boot another cores before enter OD mode, we can make the secure boot fall back to normal download mode. That is amazing. There's really a way to achieve it. Secure boot has another mode, which called UART debug mode. The mode has a command that can boot another core for testing. Most importantly, when it's done, it will not decrease the count of booted cores. We can keep increase the count of booted cores until it exceeds the limit. And the UR mode has another command, download, can enter into OD mode. So, if we can enter UART mode, we can exploit S10 with the vulnerability. We found that secure boot will track the resistor in the USB cable. If the resistor matches a specific value, it will enter UART mode. But even some researchers successfully enter UART mode in Galaxy S7. The method was no longer work in Galaxy S8 and later, because the cable was changed to Type-C. We have tried many other methods, such as making a Type-C cable connected with a pull-down and pull-up resistor, or making the Type-C cable in accessory mode, or trying to communicate with S10 by the vendor-defined message. All of this work all failed. Secure boot cannot detect the resistor. So 6 months later, we stopped trying and reported the bug to Samsung on August 2019. And several days later, Samsung got back to me and told me that this issue was duplicated. This was a real blow to me, and I changed my research target to other areas. Several months later, Samsung released the patch. The title is Potential Integer Overflow. After reading the description, I guess the reporter did not notice that the bug can lead to arbitrary code execution. The patch description said it fixed the unsigned comparison issue. But actually, Samsung did not only make the comparison unsigned, but also added a size check to prevent buffer overflow. After looking at the patch, I was wondering if there was any way to bypass the check. Several days later, I found another vulnerability that can bypass the check. After looking more deeply into the function related to USB receive, I found that the provided size is calculated as a line size with a strange value. After cross-referencing this value with other areas of the system, we found that it can be changed by ODIN request. According to the debug message, we know it is used to specify the size of data packets. The value doesn't have any checks. Therefore, if we set the size of data packet to a large amount, we can bypass the check that Samsung added in October 2019 and exploit the same buffer again. This time, I reported the bug immediately. Several months later, Samsung released the patch in January 2020. They added a check to ensure the size of data packets cannot be larger than 100,000 in hex. The patch gave me an idea. And 3 hours later, I figured out another exploit. So, let's discuss the third vulnerability. This time, we can exploit the Galaxy S10. Odin has another operation command, can flush the partition information table. The table is small, thus Odin only allocates a heap buffer to store it instead of using the big buffer in front of code segment. We cannot directly overflow it, because there is a check to make sure that the size is smaller than the heap buffer to prevent heap overflow. Remember the second vulnerability I just mentioned? We can use the size of packet data to enlarge the receive size. Although the patch added an additional check to the size of packet data, the limit is 6F in hex. But the heap buffer size for the partition information table has only 2000 in hex, which could lead to heap overflow. This is the pseudocode that shows what happens when Odin tries to receive data. According to the pseudocode, we can see the USB receive will receive the packet data size variable only if the request size is bigger than 6F in hex, or if the first receive attempt cannot get enough data. This is what we need to achieve. But the USB receive function will keep receiving data until the passed size is reached. Even if we send data in huge intervals, the device will still be waiting for data. Actually, we found the bug at the very beginning, but we thought it was an unexploitable vulnerability. We cannot make the USB receive function get insufficient data. So, we wasted our time on vulnerability 1. But after seeing the patch of vulnerability 2, I was struck by lightning. I had a light bulb moment. This time, I came up with an idea, which was to send only a very small amount of data, and then remove and reinsert the USB cable. The first USB receive returned insufficient size, which allowed us to reach the second USB receive. This time, it's received with the size of packet data, allow us to overflow the heap buffer. It turned into a heap overflow challenge. We use the traditional heap exploitation technique, House of Spirit, to achieve arbitrary code execution. There is no check for the double linking list for the heap, so we can fake the chunks and overwrite the heap's metadata to insert our faked chunk into the heap. Once we can insert the fake chunk into the heap and free it, we can overwrite arbitrary address. But there is a limitation. The unused bit must not be 0. Since secure boot is 64-bit, we cannot overwrite the GOT entry, function pointers in data segment, because the unused bit is in the higher part of the address, which will always be 0 when the data is a pointer. The only chance is to overwrite the return address on stack. if we can control the first local variable in the functions. But there are only 3 function calls after we free our fact heap chunk. Luckily, one of those is the ordin command handler. The ordin command buffer is the first local variable in the handler. The command buffer is in our control, which means we can fulfill the limitation and set the unused bit to non-zero. Now, we can execute arbitrary code in secure boot. What's the next step? Since we overwrite the BSS, stack, and heap with all null bytes, it's hard to recover the data. Thus, we restart the booting process in secure boot to recover this data. But we only get exception level 1 in non-secure world. Some data in trustzone already initialized. We cannot init it twice. Therefore, we must skip the trustzone related code to keep trustzone stable. And we continue the booting process until loading kernel to memory. In this step, we replace the kernel image with a custom one. So, this is our exploit step. First, we set the size of packet data to a big number. Second, we send an ordin pit flush command to trigger USB data receive. Third, we remove and reinsert the USB cable. Trigger the second USB receive. This time, we overwrite the metadata of heap chunk. Fourth, we send another ordin command to trigger malloc and free a heap buffer. Finally, the free action overwrites the return address on stack. Then we can jump to our shellcode. The shellcode will boot custom kernel to get root privilege. Now, we got the exception level 1 in normal world. The data in secure world is still reachable, since the Knox bit is safe. But we don't have the screen passcode. The phone is still locked. We cannot read sensitive data. The storage is still encrypted. The encryption key for storage is stored in the gatekeeper trustlet. Some data also cannot be reached. For example, credit card information in Samsung Pay trustlet. There are many ways to reach the data. We can wait for the user to unlock their phone, as shown in the demo video. Since we are in non-secure kernel mode, we also can distort the request from non-secure user mode to secure world. Furthermore, it exposes an attacking service for us. Since the Knox bit is safe, the data stored in secure world still existed. There are many more vulnerabilities that we can exploit to get into the secure world. Our team found more than 10 vulnerabilities in 2019 and still find others in 2020. Outside of our team, there are 10 times more vulnerabilities found by other researchers. All of these vulnerabilities need at least kernel privilege in non-secure world. For example, we can attack the gatekeeper trustlet to decrypt the storage. In May 2019, we reported a vulnerability in gatekeeper trustlet, which allows us to brute force the screen passcode. According to our test, it takes only a few hours to try all possible pattern codes. Combined with the vulnerability in gatekeeper trustlet, we can unlock the phone and reach the sensitive data. In conclusion, even if the data is stored in secure world, it still doesn't mean it's 100% secure. But it actually made exploiting harder. We need multiple vulnerabilities to retrieve the protected data. We need a landing exploit, maybe remote code execution or local secure boot exploit, followed by a kernel exploit to achieve privilege escalation to non-secure world kernel mode. After getting the root privilege, we still need a vulnerability in trustlet to break into secure world exception level 0. If we want to get all sensitive data instead of one specific piece, we need a secure OS vulnerability to control the full device. Without all of this, the data in the phone is still safe. This is a timeline for all the report times and the page dates. Thanks everyone. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask me or reach out to me by email in the future. Thank you. Okay. What's baseball? Okay. Hi. I want to answer this question. But what's the baseball? You said the model. Let me see the other questions. If a user reboot their device, will the device properly boot the original firmware? Yes. We don't change the firmware. So if the device reboot, it will reboot the original firmware. What were the two SVs on the next two slides? Let me check the slides. Sorry, I cannot find which SV you mentioned. John, can you ask again? For Kelly's questions, Samsung builds multiple versions of their phones with different hardware. We exploit the hardware with in USA. I think for the S10, S9, and S8 with Exynos models all affected by the vulnerabilities. And for the Tico's question, how were you able to view the boot information? Just reverse the boot image. Just reverse the boot image as secure boot. In demo video. In demo video, we just enter the OD mode and we can view the boot information. And for John's questions, SV. Let me check. Oh, I will answer you in the text box. Okay, and any other questions? Okay, thank you. Thanks, everyone.